Initial event in the Bluegrass Institute's Free to Learn debate series. This is something that I've looked forward to and we've wanted to do for a long time now, so thank you all for being a part of this. My name is Jim Waters. I'm the president of the Bluegrass Institute, and I'd like to again thank all of you for coming out tonight as we consider the question, should Kentucky allow charter schools? You may or may not know that Kentucky is one of only 8 states in the country now that does not have a charter school law, and so it should be an interesting discussion tonight. I would like to thank our panelists tonight, Dr. Wayne Lewis and Dr. Craig Meredith. I've met and talked with both of them, and I really think you're going to enjoy this. I think it's going to be time well spent, very productive, and we're certainly very thankful for them being willing to share their expertise with us and their insight on this issue, and I know Alan will be introducing them further. And of course, the issue of charter schools has been one that's been debated the past few years in the General Assembly in one form or another, and no doubt the issue of whether Kentucky should have parental choice and how much of that choice should be available is an issue that will continue to be debated and discussed vigorously, as it should be. This event comes as the Bluegrass Institute celebrates its 10th anniversary, its first decade as a research and education organization. We are a state-based, free market public policy think tank. We are dedicated to addressing Kentucky's greatest public policy challenges and to advancing those policies that will bring prosperity, freedom, and success to our Bluegrass state. Speaking of educating, the Free to Learn debate series is just about that. It's about informing Kentuckians on the issue of school choice by having these 2 highly qualified panelists fully debate the issue in a very civilized, respectful, and informative environment. And I know Alan's going to say more about that. But helping create the possibility of having this type of forum on such a hotly debated issue is TAC4 Solutions, a company started by Alan Claypool, who will moderate tonight's event. TAC4 Solutions helps to bring needed changes to organizations that make them stronger and better and improve their culture and processes to ensure that their teams are working together to meet their company's vision. It's a very innovative and a very impressive mission statement. Finding common ground, respecting and seeing viewpoints from the other person's perspective, striving for truth and accountability, these are the hallmarks that I believe will not only work to improve business, but also the processes by which we debate and determine public policy in Kentucky. Alan developed 9 ground rules for cohesive team behavior that TAC4 Solutions uses on all project management and projects that redesign processes to help clients work in the same direction toward common goals. That's what we want to find tonight, is some common ground. So using these ground rules, I've been impressed with what TAC4 has done. Alan has helped, and his group has helped achieve success in helping a mid-size insurance company cut in half the amount of time required to produce quarterly financial statements. If you've ever worked in that, you know that's a big success. He's also helped a school system achieve buy-in from both educators and administrators to resolve problems among school staff so that less time is spent on interpersonal problems and more time can be spent on student issues. And he not only helped business, he not only helped education, but he's also helped government. He helped a city government rescue a troubled project by helping bridge communication gaps between departments, which resulted in significant financial savings and improved customer service. So prior to starting TAC4, Alan was a principal consultant for 13 years at Utilities International Incorporated. That's a Chicago consulting company that specializes in financial software for utility companies. He's been certified by the Project Management Institute as a project management professional, PMP. He holds a master's degree in mathematics from the University of Illinois. But he is in Louisville, Kentucky tonight to host this event, so please welcome with me, if you will, TAC4 founder and president and the moderator for tonight's event, Mr. Alan Claypool.
Are we on? Yes. That's hilarious. I've never been introduced like that so much. So, thanks, Jim. As Jim says, I'm Alan Claypool, TAC4 Solutions, and we work mostly with businesses to change culture in their business. And about 2 years ago, I was given a seminar and someone said, how do you implement the ground rules that you teach in business in politics? And I said, well, I don't. I complain all the time in politics, and I accuse the other side of horrible things. And that challenged me because I had just been talking about how important it is to live these ground rules in every aspect of your life. And so I changed my brain. I started caring about the other side's needs as much as my own. That did not make me less partisan. It did make me hear the other side's needs better and come up with better solutions, just as it does in business. And so 2 years ago, about a year ago, we started this event called Tackle with TAC 4 to try to fight to fight the fights. So we have such a mentality in our political conversation that I'm right and you're an idiot or you're evil. And what we try to do here in this discussion is drastically change that debate to where instead I'm seeing you as a person with valid needs, and I'm trying to hear what your needs are and change my solution so that we're meeting your needs as well. So what we do with Tackle here is we try to provide a venue for rational, respectful political discourse, where we're mentoring both the panelists and you who are attending in a new way to think, in a new way to have these conversations. And so we ask that you not only listen to what's going on up here on this stage, but that you also listen to our ground rules and apply them to your own conversations that you're having. When you're on Facebook, are you being one-sided without hearing the other side? Are you saying things that assume negative intent from the other side? And really pause and rethink before you type those words on Facebook. That's a challenging thing to do. And that's really the goal of our event here is to learn a new way to have political conversations. What would otherwise be very controversial, heated conversations, when you feel yourself getting emotional, pause and think about tonight. Think about our ground rules for tonight. If you don't have the ground rules, they're on the back table. You can go get them. And pause and say, how do I need to change my thinking? Am I correct about blaming the other side here? Is there something that I'm missing? And so the sponsors for tonight, TAC 4 Solutions is my company. We work with businesses to mostly executive leadership teams to help them find clarity and better behavior so that they are being more productive and profitable. Bluegrass Institute is the think tank, conservative think tank here in Kentucky that Jim is with, and he has sponsored this event. They received a grant, and they are paying for the venue tonight. That's the only thing that they are doing is paying for the event but they have not influenced the way we're having the conversation. In fact, the reason that they got involved was simply because Jim was on our stage right here as one of our panelists in May, and on the issue of coal, and he really appreciated the process and said, hey, let's try this again on another topic. So we appreciate them very much for sponsoring. People Strategy Consulting, I'll mention Rudy and Deanna in just a minute because they are participating in the event, and EQ Seminars, Joe is also participating in the event. We'll mention them a little bit more. Okay, so the way tonight's going to go, we have a ground rule explanation, which is what I'm doing right now. Then we will bring out our panelists. Each will have a 7-minute monologue. And then we will sit one of the panelists down. And with the other panelists, me and the other coaches, we'll deep dive into what their needs, fears, and solutions are so that all of us have a much better understanding of what they're actually trying to accomplish with their side. Without any heat, without any emotion, what are the true needs, fears, and solutions of the panelists? Then we do the same thing for the other panelists, sit the other panelists down, bring the other panelist up, and then we look to you all, the audience, not for open audience discussion, but specifically to say, what needs do you have that aren't on the board? And by the way, I forgot to mention with these 15-minute deep dive, Donna will be up here writing on the board. She's our scribe for the evening, Donna Grant, and she'll be writing down the needs, fears, and solutions for Dr. Meredith and Dr. Lewis. And then we'll turn to you and say, are there other needs that you have that aren't represented on the board yet? Things that we might need to consider. Again, not for open discussion, just to say, what is a need that's missing that you care about related to charter schools? Okay, what are the fears? And we'll talk about what we mean by fears. Now that we've got the raw information on the board, then we open it up for a 45-minute panelist free-for-all. We call it a free-for-all, however. It's monitored by us, me and Joe and Deanna, the coaches. We can throw a flag football flag here if we see a violation of our panelists of the ground rules. And that just means something was said that's a little out of kilter with truth. The truth of the ground rules that we'll talk through in just a minute. And so if we pause the event, it's not like anybody's done anything wrong. We're just trying to reset the thinking in line with the ground rules. So that'll go for 45 minutes or shorter if they run out of things to talk about. And then we do open it up for about 30 minutes of audience participation for you all to say whatever you want. We try to limit to about 3 minutes per person so that everybody has a chance to talk if you want. So feel free to get your thoughts ready on how you want to participate. There'll be a microphone over here. Okay, everybody good with what we're doing? So let's talk through the ground rules. There's 7 ground rules. The first is to show respect with no hint of blame. And this is respect both to the panelist and to the entire other side. All the people on the other side, respect them and show no blame. Point no fingers toward people on the other side. Ground rule 2, assume positive intent from all on the other side. But how can I? Because they're so evil. It's a really tough thing to do, and yet what we try to get you to believe, the truth that all on the other side are really just trying to make the world a better place, just as you are. They might have a different definition of better. They might have a different method of getting there, but those people on the other side do have positive intent, wanting to make the world a better place. So we ask you to believe that. We ask your words to represent that, show it to be true. Ground rule 3, understand and care about the other side's needs, fears, and propose solutions. It's the whole reason that we have the board over here. And when we open it up for discussion between the 2 panelists, we actually ask the panelists to start the discussion by saying, there's a need over on your side that I wasn't really aware of, or that my solution's not meeting. Let's talk about that. Prove that you care about the other side's needs. As though you are both rock climbing together, you are belayed to each other, and you are both going to make it to the top or make it to the bottom together. See yourself belayed to the people on the opposite side who you want to think of as your enemy. You're belayed to them. As a human, we are all belayed to each other, and so be aware of that and care about their needs. Ground rule 4, do not complain without offering solutions with realistic action steps that meet both sides' needs. Solutions, solutions, solutions. One of the things we ask in business is for every time I have a frustration to envision that I am holding a flag. I write my frustration on that flag, and I hold that flag until I have figured out how to resolve my frustration. Not until I wait for you to resolve my frustration. What am I going to do? Personal responsibility about my own frustrations. But you're causing it. No, what can I do? What can I do to fix my own frustration? And we ask that same thing on this stage. Don't just come with complaints. Come with a solution, something that will make it better. Ground rule number 5 is the hardest one on this stage. Clarify opinion from fact. So let's talk about that just a minute. Statistics, fact or opinion? They are opinions. The raw data from a statistic is a fact. Anything else about that statistic, how the question was asked, how I interpret the result of, anything that I would infer from that statistic is really, I am bringing my worldview to it. And so it's an opinion, okay? So as you bring things to the table, we ask the panelists to say an awful lot of I thinks, I believe, I think, I believe. My thought is, as opposed to just declaring something as true because you believe it's true. That shuts down our conversations. That keeps me from hearing what you care about. Is when I start saying things as a fact that really are my worldview. And so that's actually where we usually throw the most flags, is where we see something being stated as truth that, hey, I might even agree with it, but I agree with it because of my worldview, not because it's a fact, okay? Otherwise, we're just lying, okay? Ground rule 6, seek the truth and workable solutions over political positioning. We want our panelists to actually care about resolving the problems, not about winning. And most of the time, in most every situation, I tend to believe that I'm right. I'm way high on a pedestal, and I've got a large amount of the truth with me. And what we ask our panelists to do is to realize that they've got part of the truth, but so does the other person. That we all have some things that we have read, that we've researched, that we've seen and experienced, and that we know to be true from our experience, but that we internally sort of believe that everything I think is true, and we act that way. And the reality is, there's a lot of what I know that really is truth, and there's a lot of what I know that's maybe part of the truth. I don't have the full picture, and so we need information from the other people, from the other side. So come down off your pedestal. It's okay to be on a pedestal, just a lower pedestal, equal with the other people. And Ground Rule 7 admits that we do have differences. We have core value differences. And where we find those core philosophical differences, just clarify what the difference is without any accusation. Just say, okay, well, you have that as a value, and I have this opposite thing as a value. No blame, no accusation. And now we can understand better why our solutions might diverge and be different. Okay? So those are our ground rules. Diverging roads. Here's our ground rules, and our coaches for the night are Deanna, Philpott, and Rudy. Is Rudy going to make it? We think he's, okay, so Rudy's he went to the wrong building, so he's still on his way. Rudy Jones is going to be our timekeeper for the evening to make sure that we're not here till 10 o'clock. He'll keep us on track, and you will hear him loudly say, 3 minutes to go, or we're done, and just let him interrupt and be good with that, because that's what's making sure you get home on time. And Deanna Philpott is the founder of People Strategy Consulting. Sorry, I've only said your company's name 1,000 times. And they work with leadership. They work on leadership with building leaders inside of organizations. And then our other coach is Joe Luttrell, president of EQ Seminars. Inspirational speaker, and he's also the author of Emotional Accountability, How Washington, Lincoln, and Churchill Transformed Anxiety into Emotional Intellect. It's a book that's coming out hopefully in the next couple of months, we think. And then we also have Donna Grant, our consultant extraordinaire at TAC4 Solutions, who's going to be our scribe for the evening. And now I would like for our panelists to come out. I think they're back here. And we'll introduce our panelists for the evening. I do want to say a word about what occurred the last couple of weeks. 2 weeks ago, Linda Duncan, school board member here at Jefferson County, agreed to be our panelist. And so we sent out the invitation, and we had, within a day, we were sold out. We had over 200 people sign up for this event, with Linda being the school board member, being the panelist. And then she started having second thoughts, as saying, I don't think that I'm the right expert to be on this stage. She said, I know a lot, I've read a lot of facts, but I think I'm not the expert. So let me try to find someone else. And so she tried and then withdrew because she could not find anybody else. She actually told me she was receiving internal pressure not to be on the stage, and so that's why she is not here. She withdrew. So we were very fortunate to be able to get, okay, Craig and Dr. Lewis, y'all can come on out. We now have Dr. Craig Meredith, who is the former, actually he just retired as the superintendent of Triad Public Schools in North Lewisburg, Ohio. Craig, you can come on out. Yay. And the way we were able to get Craig is actually a client of my company, TAC4 Solutions, who has taken his entire school district through our ground rules, all the teachers and staff through the ground rules. Craig, his school won the Elementary Principals Award in 2013 in Ohio. He is now an adjunct professor at Urbana University in Urbana, Ohio. And he's the owner of Merck Educational Services, building capacity to sustain change. So thank you so much for filling in at the last minute. This was just, I think, Friday when we confirmed this. So we're thrilled that we actually have this event, and it's all due to his generosity. And then our other panelist is Dr. Wayne Lewis, Jr. Come on out. Thank you very much. Yeah. He's Assistant Professor and Principal Leadership Program Chair in the Department of Educational Leadership Studies and an affiliated faculty member with the African American and Africana Studies program at the University of Kentucky. He's also the author of Politics of Parent Choice in Public Education and the upcoming Black Choice. And he's on the board of directors for the Kentucky Charter Schools Association. So these are our panelists tonight who will be talking about, should Kentucky allow charter schools? These will be our ground rules. We've decided that Dr. Lewis is going first. Is that right? So Deanna and Joe, if you all could go, and Donna, if y'all could go on and come up. And Craig, you and I can take a seat for now if you want. There's your chair. And Rudy is still on his way, so he will let you know when your 7 minutes are up. Could you, in the meantime, just kind of check your clock? Oh, you're doing it. Okay. Brian is our timekeeper until. So, all right. 7 minutes. You're on. Charter schools. Thank you for being here.
Good evening, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here this evening. I've just had the opportunity to meet Craig, and we've been talking, and I think this promises to be one of the best conversations that we've had about charter schools in Kentucky, and so I'm really excited about this. Let me tell you very briefly how I got interested in this. I started as a public school teacher in the New Orleans public schools, in Booker T. Washington High School in New Orleans, Louisiana, and saw very, very early on, even in this city where I grew up, my home city, that children, depending on where they live, depending on their parents' education, socioeconomic status, could very well be sentenced to attend schools that did very little to prepare them for anything meaningful in the world. That troubled me. And at that time, as a first-year teacher, I had no idea what school choice was. I didn't understand what charter schools were. But I understood that just couldn't be right, that it couldn't be okay that we sentenced children to attend schools, poor-performing schools, schools that were not staffed appropriately, did not have appropriate resources, simply because of where they lived and their parents' education and socioeconomic circumstances. And so from that point, I decided that I wanted to play some type of significant role in working to bring about policy change that would give all children the opportunity. I came across charter schools not until my doctoral program at North Carolina State University, and decided to do my dissertation work in that area, the politics of choice and the politics of charter schools. And so where I like to begin this conversation is without assuming that everyone understands what a charter school is. And so I start just with the definition of what charter schools are. First, it's important to understand that charter schools are a state-level policy phenomenon. That's significant because in the 40-plus states where we have charter schools, you should note that what a charter school is from state to state can vary quite significantly. We'll talk about a number of those different areas, but areas like admissions, like accountability, what those systems look like, what teachers can be hired, how teachers are held accountable, all of those things are defined very specifically at the state level. And so when we say charter school in Georgia, we may not be talking about the exact same thing as charter school in South Carolina or charter school in North Carolina. So we must be very clear. What I'm going to do tonight is talk a little bit about the specifics of what we mean by charter school in Kentucky, and talk about some of the things that we want to do. Charter schools are public schools in every sense of the word. And so sometimes you'll hear us use the terminology public charter schools, sometimes just charter schools, but truth be told, there's no such thing as a charter school that's not public. So if a school charges tuition for children to attend, then it is not a charter school, then it's a private school, it's an independent school. Charter schools are public schools, they are open enrollment, they are tuition free. The only children that attend charter schools are children whose parents apply for their children to attend charter schools, so nobody's going to be sent to a charter school against their will. Charter schools are non-sectarian, do not discriminate on the basis of religion or sexuality, ethnicity, race, any other category that you can come up with. They are publicly funded by local, state, and federal dollars in the same way that traditional public schools are funded. from dollars coming from all of those sources. Public charter schools are funded in the exact same way. One of the criticisms of charter schools that we hear leveled quite a bit, and I'm sure we'll have conversation about it today, is that they rob traditional public schools of funding. And that's not true. If we are going to charge that anyone robs traditional public schools of funding, maybe we could say it's parents. Because the only way a child gets into a charter school is if a parent chooses to take him or her out of a traditional public school and send them to a charter school. And then the funds that the state sends to that traditional public school follows the kid to the charter school. But that's no different than a kid leaving Jefferson County Public Schools and going to Oldham County Schools. The funds that originally went to Oldham, they would now go to, originally went to Jefferson, those funds would now go to Oldham. And then public charter schools are held accountable to state and federal academic standards as well. The theory behind charter schools is that they're given a greater degree of flexibility for an increased amount of performance accountability. Okay, so charter schools are held to higher standards, and of course, understanding that this varies significantly across states and what this looks like. We'll talk about Kentucky, but theoretically, charter schools are held to a higher standard, and in exchange for those performance standards, for meeting those performance standards, they're given the freedom, the flexibility, the autonomy to reach those standards. Okay, that's about where I'll stop for my opening statements. Mm-hmm.
Dr. Meredith.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. My background is probably somewhat similar to Wayne in that I began my career as a public school teacher. I have taught everywhere from grade 3 up through 8th grade. Taught in a self-contained environment. I've taught in a traditional junior high setting. Also worked with high school students. I've been a district treasurer in a small district. I've been a teacher in an extremely large district. I've been an administrator in a medium-sized district, and I've been an administrator in a small district. And I bring those background experiences to the table that help form my positions regarding the value of what I see as an educational system that first and foremost has to be for the boys and girls that make up the population in any particular area. In Ohio, much as Wayne was referencing, the charter school movement began as somewhat of an experiment. It was a pilot, large metropolitan district, as oftentimes my experience and my reading has been that the initiative for charter schools actually came out of the need to try to better serve children in lower performing school districts. As time has gone on in Ohio, the charter school movement has taken on different look. We have what you would typically call a traditional brick and mortar charter school. You have blended learning environments where some of the education is done within a traditional classroom type setting, where the rest of the instruction is done what we would typically think of as web-based instruction with a teacher of record somewhere, could be anywhere as long as they're properly credentialed. And then the third type of charter school is completely web-based. And the type of charter school really, from my experience, is a lot of times is unique to the demographics of the school district where they're pulling the students from. In Ohio, there are several very, very large, what we would call online charter schools. As Dr. Lewis indicated, they are public schools. They're publicly funded. almost exclusively in rural areas, any students that choose to, or the parents who choose to have their children go to a charter school, it's almost always an online type situation. Because in the district where I just came from, it was the nearest charter community school, driving-wise, was probably about 35, 40 minutes away, okay, which was somewhat impractical for most parents. And I will speak to that as far as some responsibilities of local districts a little bit later on. In the suburban districts and in the inner city districts, those same opportunities are there, okay, for the online schools, but that is where many of the traditional brick and mortar type charter schools are located, because that's where the majority of the students are. When I was asked to put this together, one of the things that I told Mr. Claypool was that I am very much opposed to the way charter schools have been set up in the state of Ohio. In my mind, I see some things that could be done differently that may make it more viable, and hopefully we'll get into some of that discussion today. But the way it's been done in Ohio has been detrimental to the constituent that I think is most important, and that are the children, because of a resource allocation issue that Dr. Lewis did mention, and we'll, I'm sure, have an opportunity to talk about as we move forward. I have some basic talking points that I'll address as we go through tonight. The first being that there's a perception, and Dr. Lewis mentioned this, that when the charter school movement began, the idea was that we were going to create a more flexible learning environment that had higher academic standards, that was more effective in meeting the needs of the boys and girls that were attending. Okay? I'm going to address what the data in Ohio actually says concerning the viability of, or the effectiveness of, the charter schools within the state. The other thing that I would like to address this evening has to do with a mismatch in the laws that govern the charter schools and the public schools in Ohio, because no matter where the parents choose to have their child go, it's still the local district's responsibility, and we'll get into a little bit more of what I mean by that as we move forward. That ranges from special education needs to transportation needs. There's a whole gamut of responsibilities that are not really ultimately the responsibility of the charter school. The next thing, I am going to have to talk about the finances. I'm going to speak specifically to real numbers in the district where I came from, and how that in a small district impacted our ability to meet the needs of our boys and girls. And then finally, one of my positions right now, I'm supervising young prospective teachers. I supervise student teachers. And I always speak to them about how proud I am of them in this environment that we are in right now, which, from my perspective, has become somewhat disconcerting as far as the professionalism given to educators in Ohio, I assume in the country. And I'll address some of those issues and how that ties into the charter school movement. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much, Dr. Meredith. All right, you're up. Donna, would you mind? Yes. Okay, so. There you go. So where we go next is Deanna and Joe and I will ask probing questions of Dr. Lewis. Donna will take notes, writing out the needs, fears, and solutions that we can pull out of you related to charter schools. So you all talk a lot. Help us as much as you want. And just overall, tell us a little bit about what needs you are seeing not being addressed by public schools and why you might think that charter schools are the answer.
I believe charter schools can help with some of the challenges that we're facing in public education. And I'll break those into 4 big areas. So choice for families, accountability, flexibility for leaders to lead, and then also flexibility for teachers and leaders to innovate.
Okay, let's make sure we have those. Choice for parents, is that right?
That's right.
Accountability for the schools?
Accountability for schools and accountability for professionals.
Okay.
Flexibility for leaders to lead, and flexibility for teachers and leaders to innovate.
And Joe has a question for you.
Could you clarify the difference between a school like YPass, which is a magnet school, and a charter school?
I'm not familiar with YPass.
Are there other types of schools like that? You have to apply and you have to get accepted, and so and those are in Kentucky now.
Right.
And so it's a little bit, just kind of what the lines there would be.
Right, so magnet schools are schools of the local school district. Local school districts create magnet schools with specialties in different areas. And so some of those specialties could be as general as college and career prep. Some specialties could be much more specific, science and technology, pre-medicine, robotics, biomechanics, all those types of things are possibilities. The difference between a magnet school, though, and the magnet school and a charter school is that a magnet school is a school district school. A charter school, however, would have autonomy from the local school district. And so whereas the local school board is the policy-making body for all district schools, whether it's magnet or traditional public school, a charter school would have its own school governing body, comprised usually, and it depends on the legislation, but usually of parents, of teachers, of community members, and then that would be the policy body for the charter school.
Yeah.
I don't remember what the time was, but I could give a little more.
Please do.
A little more flesh to these ideas. First, in thinking about choice for families, it is the case that in traditional public school districts across the country, you're beginning to see more choices than we once had. And some of those choices are in the way of magnet schools. Some of them are in the way of specialized academies. Some school districts are bringing in choice by way of creating zones, and you see some of this in Louisville, creating zones where you give parents choices amongst schools that reside within a particular zone. And so I think we're starting to understand within public education across the board that choice is really a good thing.
And what is the need that choice meets?
The need that choice meets, and I'll give you 2 primary ones. I spoke in the beginning about this idea that across America, particularly in high poverty areas, the quality of a school, and quality based on indicators like teachers' years of experience, based on performance assessment, those types of indicators, resources at a particular school, that those things we find are often correlated with the neighborhood, the socioeconomic status of the neighborhood that the school serves. So if you're talking about a poor neighborhood, then more likely than not across America, it's going to be the case that those kids would attend an under-resourced school.
And so giving parents in those poorer neighborhoods a choice to possibly move out. So I'm definitely hearing a need related to choice of something about in poverty areas, resource-constrained schools.
Yeah.
So something that choice allows for.
And then the truth is, it's not poverty is the one that stands out, I believe, most clearly, and I think it's one of the biggest needs that we have. But in addition to poverty, we have things like differences in kids' learning styles, differences in terms of what kids want to do with their lives and with their careers. And depending on where they live and the choices that are available to them in the local school district, a child or a family may or may not have options within that district that will prepare him or her for the career or the life that they aspire to. And so choice, I believe, deals with that need as well.
Okay. Did you get that? Choice for aspiring student goals. Say again? Oh, go on and write something up there about aspiring.
Specific needs.
Yes. Aspiring, help me again. The students' aspiring goals.
Yeah,
Choice helps
that's
meet
right.
students' aspiring goals.
Yeah, career goals, life goals.
Okay.
Dr. Lewis,
Yes,
if
ma'am.
I may ask, how does the charter school address the difference in the learning needs or the styles? Because you referenced that as a really important need. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, one of the things that we recognize, I believe most choice advocates will recognize, is you'd have a difficult time finding any school that can address the true diversity of learning needs, of learning styles, of desires for parents, of aspirations of children. You find it's difficult, if not impossible, to find a school that addresses all of those things. And so what choice advocates would say is that we want to create enough options out there, diverse schools that do different things, schools that serve kids in different ways, so that parents can choose the school that most appropriately meets the needs of his or her child. So not that a charter school would do a better job of meeting all the kids' needs, but that having a range of options would be a better option better for parents.
And so Deanna definitely brought out a need of the learning style of a student, that choice helps give choices. School choice would give choices for different learning styles that maybe a traditional school would not give. So learning styles of students would be a need. Okay?
Yeah. In the area of accountability, I can talk
Yes.
a little bit about that need. And it's related. So if we think about schools that typically operate in high poverty areas, these are schools that, especially in most urban areas, have not performed at a satisfactory level as defined by state metrics for a long period of time.
Okay.
They've continued to operate that way and nothing happens. And so choice advocates, charter school advocates would say that with charter schools, if you open a charter school, if the law is written the way the law should be written and implemented in the way that it should be implemented, a charter school would not be able to continue to fail and operate. That school should be closed down. Along the way to closing down, there should be mandatory actions in place to get the school to where it needs to. But if the school cannot appropriately serve the children, then the school should not be there. And that's not anything that we have in place with traditional public schools right now.
Okay. So the accountability, you're asking for the accountability in the public school or of the charter school?
Well,
That choice gives accountability, but is it accountability to both?
different types of accountability. So when we think about accountability, I typically talk about accountability in three different ways, right? Inputs accountability, where there's accountability for the things that we put into schools, like resources. We make sure that schools are resourced right. We make sure that teachers are credentialed, that leaders are credentialed, those types of things. Then we can talk about performance accountability, which in the choice movement is typically what we're talking about when we say accountability. That's accountability, making sure that schools are performing in the way that they are, that you're having the outcomes that you want.
Okay.
But then the third type of accountability we can talk about is consumer accountability. And that is accountability directly to the parents, where parents have the opportunity to use their feet, to take their kid out of a school that is either not meeting state standards or not meeting his or her standards, and send their child to another school.
Okay. All right, good. So let's talk some about fears. Fears are things that if the other side gets their way, which in this case would mean there are no charter schools, what do you lose? What goes wrong?
Actually, what happens is we continue exactly as we are.
And what's wrong with that? What's going wrong?
What's wrong with where we are is we have a system where truthfully this idea that we talk about in America that you can work hard and achieve anything that you want to achieve if you just put your heart and your mind to it. Well, that's not really true. Where we talk about education as being this great equalizer, where you can send a kid to school and go on to high school and college and then whatever else, that only works most times in America if you live in the right zip code, if your parents have the right level of education, if they have the right resources, whether they be social capital, political capital, in order to put kids in the right position so that they can be successful. But the reality is that absent those things, absent those resources, absent those forms of capital, poor children end up in situations where it's next to impossible to really get out of poverty.
So the lack of quality education is greatly disadvantaging the student.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. Other fears.
That really sums it up. I mean, the not having what we're interested in going for with the choice movement means more of the same.
Okay. So solutions. Let's talk solutions because you've talked some about how different the implementation very much matters. Mm-hmm. So
Absolutely.
What implementation do you see as the right solution?
Well, I don't think there's a right necessarily or wrong. We can talk about policy design and we can talk about implementation. Part of the problems, and Craig and I started talking about this, I know he's going to talk about it when he comes up as well. Charter school laws in lots of states have not been written well. I believe in Kentucky we're in a particularly good position because we're one of the last states to consider truly adopting charter schools, and so we can learn from lots of the mistakes that other states have made. But one of the things that has prevented states from really writing good charter school policy, really good charter school law, is that there's been so much polarization. It's been a left versus right or a pro-charter versus no charter. Whereas if everyone could sit down together, put their heads together and say, what can we do so that we can write the best possible charter school law so that we can have charter schools on the ground that serve children well, that really add to what we have in terms of a public education system. That is best case scenario.
So we only have 2 minutes left. Do you have time to say one or two of the policies that might be good policy?
Yeah, one of the things that we know to be critical in a charter school policy hinges on charter school authorizers. And charter school authorizers are the persons, the bodies that the law gives the power to actually grant a charter. All right, so let's say we have a group of parents, we have a group of teachers, group of educators that want to apply for an actual charter. The body that they would apply to would be the authorizer. And so the law has to set up who that authorizer is. In some cases, that authorizer can be a local school district. In some cases, it can be a public university. In some cases, there's an actual charter school commission, state charter school commission that is set up that folks can apply to. But that authorizer is so critical because that authorizer has to, one, hold those applications to a really high standard, to ensure that not just anybody who falls off a truck can get a charter. That's not what we want. We want to make sure you have really high quality applications so that you get a good charter off the ground, and then after it's off the ground, you want to make sure that that authorizer is doing what it's supposed to do to hold that charter school accountable. And so in some of the laws that we see, what I would say are good laws across the country, and one of the things we're talking about in Kentucky is automatic closure provisions provisions that actually limit the amount of flexibility authorizers have to allow failing charter schools to continue to operate. Because failing charter schools that continue to operate does us no good. We have traditional public schools that continue to fail.
Okay, time is up. So put high-quality authorizer of the charter school with accountability, that the authorizer is also holding the charter school accountable.
Yes,
Is that
sir.
correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Joe and Deanna, any last question or comment? We're out of time, but
I have one question, if you could just answer it really quickly, or we could go on. Why charter schools over fixing the whole education system?
That's actually a pretty easy one.
Okay, good.
Because we've been trying to do that for a long time, and we're still in this same situation.
Is it a possible solution, or have we just gotten so beaten down from trying that it doesn't even seem like a real solution?
I would argue that in the United States to date, right, we haven't figured out, and I'll speak specifically to high poverty urban districts, we haven't really figured out how to take high poverty urban districts that have really just fell into utter chaos. We haven't really figured out how to take those districts and turn them around wholesale. And so we're left with this dilemma, right? If we don't know how to fix the whole district, then do we hold all kids hostage within that district until we figure that out? Or are there alternatives that we can create, options that we can create for families, where even if it's a percentage of those kids that we get out, do we let them out? Or as Dr. Howard Fuller said, do we let them all burn?
okay. Great question. Thank you, Donna. All right. Thank you very much. Now you see how it goes. This is how we do it. So we ask what needs you are trying to meet in general.
I think the position that I come from as a lifelong educator, the number one need always will be, always has been, and always should be for true educators, and that is the academic progress of the boys and the girls in the classroom. Okay? The academic achievement is different than the academic progress, and I'll speak to that here in a little bit. But that is the number one, is the academic progress of the boys and girls in the classrooms, and what can we do to ensure that that's happening.
Excellent. Talk about progress versus achievement. That's
Okay,
interesting.
progress, I'll equate it to, pardon my going back to my coaching days, but sometimes it's one of the easiest analogies. When I was a track coach, I would get, and I coached at the high school level and the junior high level, but the best examples I can think of are at the junior high level. I worked at a school with about 1,200 7th and 8th graders, and my track team was huge. I'm talking 150 kids, 160 kids, and we took everybody. If I would have, on that first day of practice, treated everybody the same and had them all run the same amount, lift the same amount of weights, the next day or the next week, my track team would have been down to probably 50 or 60 kids, because my children, my athletes, they would have lost hope. Progress is the way we measure the continual growth of a child academically, just as I would measure their growth on an athletic event by collecting baseline data, putting in place research-based interventions, strategies that we know work, and then over time, continuing to probe and monitor their achievement level and document the progress that they are making.
So I'm definitely hearing a solution, which would be more what you just described. Evidence-based research documented, evidence-based.
Yeah,
procedures.
to some degree, and I'll speak to that as we go through, but I'm not sure that we're not, in Ohio, we're trying this. Okay, and I'll speak to that here in a little bit with the data.
In public or in charter?
Both.
Both. Okay.
Both. We are valuing the idea of progress.
Okay.
The catch is that progress takes different levels of resource and different levels of training and different levels of expertise for the professionals that are working with the kids in the particular quintiles. And when I say a quintile, I'm talking about that 20% at the top, the next 20%, the next 20%, the next 20%, the next 20%. There's a different level of training that's necessary to effectively meet the needs of students at all those levels.
Okay. Okay.
And resources also. Okay, a second need, and I mentioned this to Dr. Lewis earlier, but one of my favorite quotes, I attribute this to Dr. Chuck Achilles. He has a quote, basically says, beware the problem of the solution. And put in another term, a lot of times we end up with solutions that have not been thought through. And part of what Dr. Lewis was saying a minute ago about having the right people sit at the table and have those discussions, and the people that understand education making those decisions. Okay. The problem, the need that I see in Ohio, and I can't speak to how it's set up in Kentucky right now, but in Ohio, the people that are making many of the policy decisions that are affecting the boys and girls are not educators. They're not people with any expertise. It would be akin to me going into, with my doctorate in education, going into a hospital and providing recommendations to how the ER should run more effectively. Doesn't make any sense. Okay, but that's what's happening, and it continues to happen. And that's part of that polarization that Dr. Lewis spoke to.
I think it's a very common thing that happens in most of the political arena, that we have solutions that are just as problematic as the problem that we already have, because we're not really doing this type of discussion where we're listening to each other.
Exactly.
It's perfect. Tell us a little about well, do you have more needs?
Yes, I think one of the needs, and this is kind of interesting how this works, but you can't throw money at the problem. However, there's a resource allocation problem in the state of Ohio. I don't know how it's set up in Kentucky, but there's a huge discrepancy in the amount of money that is available to local school districts to provide the same level of accountability to all kids across the state. And let me give you one example of that. In the district that I came from, we had fairly high poverty. We have about 56% of our funding comes from the state level. The rest of it is generated locally, and we get a pittance from the federal government. Okay? With that in mind, what ends up happening is that the students in my district were, in effect, provided somewhere in a neighborhood of about $8,000 per kid to educate. In wealthier districts in Ohio, they don't get as much state money, but the local people have the resources. And there are school districts in Ohio where the per pupil allocation is not $8,000. It's $15,000, $16,000, $17,000 per child per year. That's huge when it comes to the availability of resources. And as we go through the charter school dilemma, from my perspective, the way it's set up in Ohio is those resources are drained off the public schools. The second thing that happens is there's
Due to charter. Charter is draining those.
And this is a need, is that we need to look at the true needs of the districts, not the global need. And what I mean by that is, Dr. Lewis spoke a lot about urban, high poverty city districts. That's where the charter school started in Ohio. It is now in all counties, all school districts, through online or through some version, charter school options are available. The data show that many of the districts that are losing children to the charter schools are doing an amazing job. Achievement and progress.
Where there's a charter school, the public school is doing a good job.
Yeah, and I will speak, if I could, to a couple of statistics, and I'll be careful on how I define this.
Okay.
Okay. In the 2012-2013 school year, in Ohio, there were 93% of the school districts that were in the first quintile, that's the top one, for achievement, were public schools. 6.4% were charter. Second quintile, 94.8. Charter, 5.2. Okay? When you got down to the fifth quintile, which were the lower achieving districts, the ones that the performance was not that high, 10.5% of them were public schools. 89.5% of them were charter.
Of the lowest performing.
Of the lowest performing. Okay? I say that because there are problems. There are districts where the students are not getting, the boys and girls are not getting what they need. That is, you can't, that is not a defendable position to say that that's not happening. The concern I have is that the solution that is wrapped up in the idea of charter schools does not effectively address what we really care about, and that's how those students progress.
So I think I'm hearing you say that if, with or without charter schools, it's those districts that would be the lower performing either way, whether it's charter or whether it's not charter. Is that what those statistics are implying?
What it's saying
As
is
an
that
opinion?
right now, the lower performing districts are not public schools, okay? The lower performing districts are the charter. Okay, now, the flip side of that is that the biggest districts, so if you look at the numbers, are large urban districts. And within a large urban district, there are a lot of little charter schools. Those children, what the data shows me, is those children are leaving underperforming urban districts, going to charter schools, and they're not performing any better than they were in the district to start with.
5 minutes? Okay. Okay, so let's talk solutions then. So specifically for the lower performing districts, what's a better solution?
I think it's a resource allocation issue. The second thing it is we as public schools have to be willing to look outside the box at blended learning models, okay? And let me speak to those two things as solutions, and we may come back around to other things. From a resource allocation situation, in my little district, children left a high-performing district and went to a district, or charter schools, primarily online virtual schools, draining about $150,000 from my operating budget. That, depending on how I look at it, at about $6,000 per student.
And these are actual numbers from your
Yes,
school district?
yes.
Okay.
That's about 25 kids. Now, that's not enough drop-off, 25 students, to allow me as a superintendent to effectively reduce staff because they're spread out over the whole district. Okay, but with that $150,000, I could have hired 4 additional specialized teachers, reading specialists, mathematics specialist. I could have hired approximately 10 experienced paraprofessionals to support teachers and help collect data. I could have purchased one-on-one iPads for all of my children, grades 6 through 12. Okay, there are numerous other opportunities. Okay, that's what I'm getting at. Because we're a high-performing district, why are we losing revenue and resources when we're already doing a good job? The second thing with regard to that is in Ohio, the legislature has dropped the ball, in my opinion, on school funding several times. The Supreme Court in the state of Ohio actually said that the way we are currently funding schools is unconstitutional. They've done some minor tweaks here and there, hadn't changed. Even with the new formula, it's still, a lot of that disparity is still there. My hypothesis would be that if we effectively allocated resources where the need is the greatest, I believe that the data shows that the public schools do just as good a job as the charter. And the blended learning model, which hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about there shortly because I see my time is about up. But the example that I can give is I, as a superintendent in a small district, had a chemistry teacher who was also Army National Guard. He got deployed. I could not find a chemistry teacher. My solution was I hired or reassigned a teacher in an area that I had a lot of extra resources and could afford. She became the credit flexibility facilitator, and we contracted with a vendor that provides a state-of-the-art, high-end curriculum that's aligned to the standards, and we provided those kids with chemistry in the absence of a chemistry teacher. We partnered with the local university, and we brought in the chemistry teacher and students, and they conducted labs. That's thinking outside the box.
Okay. Any last questions from Deanna or Joe? Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. Technical break. Thank you. Okay. Actually, it was now time for audience. Should I give this? Okay.
Alan, I do have a quick question.
Yes, go, Jim.
Could you clarify? Dr. Meredith said that he's equating the online curriculums in his state with charter schools. And I get the impression, do you agree that those are what you're talking about? Are you talking about more of the brick and mortar type traditional schools? Is his analogy, does that work for you in terms of the comparison?
Well, what we're talking about in Kentucky, in terms of our conversation, and we don't have a law at this point, but what we've been talking about is brick and mortar charter schools. Now, that's not to say that we made a decision that we would absolutely not want to have the cyber charter schools or virtual charter schools, but I think that's a conversation in the policy that's worth having here in Kentucky. And I think given the findings of some of the national findings we're seeing with virtual charter schools and the things happening in Ohio, there's cause to look at it with caution and figure out what's the best way to move forward here in Kentucky. So I appreciate his comments and his perspectives a whole lot.
Okay. And just as far as a clarification, does Ohio have any experience with brick and mortar type charter schools?
Absolutely. If I misspoke earlier, there's a range. Just picture a continuum, and there are strictly online charter schools, community schools. There are blended charter schools, just like there are blended learning models within the public schools. And there are completely brick and mortar charter schools, just as there are completely brick and mortar. It runs the continuum in Ohio.
Okay, it's now your turn, and this is not time for audience long-term comments, but we do want you to come to the mic, if you step right up. And what we're looking for here are other needs and fears that are not represented on the board yet, and I have like 5 in my head, so I'm hoping that you all have quite a few as well, so jump in.
So in the state of Kentucky specifically, I think that we really lead the nation in having any legislation like the Districts of Innovation waivers, right? I don't think that there are very many states that have tried to design an innovative solution within the public sector in that way. So what I'm wondering, and you're clearly you have significantly more expertise on charter schools, the spirit of the charter school that removes some of the bureaucratic structures and allows more choice and more design that is in some ways individualized to the student. Do you think that there's the opportunity?
Can I pause you for a moment?
Yes.
All we're looking for right now are needs and fears. At the very end, we will be able to ask panelists questions, but I'm looking for more needs that aren't being met that charter schools may, or that needs that charter schools might mess up. Fears also.
I'll slowly back away from the mic and come back later.
That's okay. I want you to ask that question
Okay.
later. Okay? So specifically, are there needs that aren't on the board? Are there fears? Meaning, if we got charter schools, what would we lose?
Yes. With all due respect, I mean, the research and statistics in comparing charter schools and the regular public school system is just very difficult. And it's more of a research and statistical procedures, these two gentlemen know, because you have to be comparing the same type of random samples and the same types of students, and it is extremely difficult to do that process, and there's a lot of that gets published. My other fear is that in the proposed legislation by Brad Montel, I believe it's HB 242, Section 6, number 1. It calls for the establishment of that the charter school assembly. Right, you know what you mentioned, yes. But the creation of that is based on the selection. First of all, it creates a totally separate entity from this regular school system, which is not controlled by any of the local school boards. But what it does do is it places in the hands of the governor the possibility of selecting the panel of 9 persons. And this becomes a problem, because the people in the Commonwealth of Kentucky thereby have no choice into how this is established, and be it Republican governor or Democratic governor, with a 5-4 vote, which is in the legislation, it does not allow for a proper democratic process in the formulation of it, and it puts this particular entity outside of the rules, regulations, and even in some cases the laws of the Commonwealth of Kentucky.
Okay, fantastic. So let's stay there just a second, because you dove into some great stuff. I want to make sure I've got it all. So the commission or the authorizer could become politicized. Is that one of the things?
Yes.
Okay, did you get that?
I've got with no democratic process, so I'll insert, could become politicized.
Okay, and I think there was one other thing I wanted to make sure we got here.
Outside of Kentucky law.
There we go, outside of Kentucky laws.
Yeah,
Good.
that's by the legislation, and it does not allow in Section 17. It doesn't allow for anything for collective bargaining. In fact, it prohibits all collective bargaining by the staff of the charter school system.
Prohibits, okay, so good. So put that as a different fear, prohibits collective bargaining. Okay, thank you. Next. Great. Needs and fears, that's what we're looking for.
I'm sorry, I thought he was in law. Okay, I have first I want to speak to the need.
Good.
And then I have a really strong fear.
Good.
And the need, I think both the men did an excellent job of explaining the most important need, which is our children learning as much as they can and being as successful as they can in their schooling
Good.
education. That's the greatest need, that's the major need, whatever. I have a really big fear. And this is because, for those of you who are familiar with Jefferson County Schools, we have lots and lots of choice. And what effectively the choice does, and the way choice works, is the parents who are have the most time, the most money, and the most education are able to work the system and choose. And the children who perhaps need something special and may know that this particular school is very good, the school is full, because no matter how many schools you have, if you have special schools, eventually they'll be full, and somebody's not going to get in. And so essentially what has happened with choice, and this is in my opinion and my observation in Jefferson County, is
You're doing
that
great. Keep going.
increasing division of the rich and the poor,
Okay.
increasing learning difference, increasing lack of diversity within the schools, which we have had much more diversity in the past.
Can I reword just to make sure that we're
Yeah.
understanding? So motivated parents would tend to also then be the more resourced parents, and
Will fill
therefore
up the
charter
schools.
schools are more helping the
They're helping-
privileged as opposed to the underprivileged.
Just like magnets, the kids who least need a magnet because they're already excelling in science and math or what it is,
Okay,
get into the magnets.
okay,
Okay, so that is really a major fear, that in fact it will have the effect of pulling the more capable students out, thereby concentrating the children with great needs and disadvantages in the public school, making
Okay.
it harder for them to learn,
okay.
and in the long run have a bad effect on the whole school system. That's my other fear. We can't look at saving a few children at the expense of all the other children. That worried me, and Dr. Lewis mentioned that it would be good at least for a few. But every time you do something for a few, it's going to be at the expense of the rest, and that worries me. I wouldn't want anything that would do
So
that.
resource drain from
Right.
the underprivileged school, which makes the underprivileged school even worse.
Right.
Okay, did you get that, Donna? Something about that? Okay. Okay. Risa? Needs and fears.
Yeah, the thing that I focus on is, I think on one side it's seen as a fear and on the other as a solution, and that is competition. I think that the public schools are so used to not having to compete, and they're afraid of that. You know, they say they want to innovate, but if they have real competition, then they'll be forced to innovate, and I think they're afraid of that.
So you have am I hearing that you have a need for competition?
And, right, I'm seeing,
that-
I think competition is a solution, or a need, or whatever.
Okay.
It's a good thing.
Okay.
It's a good thing in the rest of our society, and so I think it would be a good
Okay,
thing
and I
in
will
education.
caution, just if you don't mind, I like to teach the audience the ground rules as well.
Uh-huh.
And assuming positive intent from the other side, so those who,
I think they're afraid.
okay, which is an assumption of maybe a little bit of a negative intent, so that they might be afraid of competition. We don't know that to be true, and so we like to base our comments in truth. So I would stick with that you think competition is a good thing, and that you sense resistance from the other side without an assumption of bad motive.
Or a fear of change, whatever.
Okay, next. Wonderful, thank you, Risa.
Good evening. I believe that everybody in this room thinks that all children can succeed and does want to see children succeed. And I also believe that all teachers believe that every child can learn and succeed and do well and go on to do what it is that they're born to do. My question and my fear really is that the average teacher for a charter school has about 2.5 years of experience due to the high turnover rate at charter schools, while the average public school teacher has about 14 years of experience. Kids form bonds with teachers. I mean, teachers spend more time with students than sometimes even parents do, especially the underprivileged students. So how would the introduction of charter schools in Kentucky allow for teachers to become more, a bigger part of that school instead of being turned over so quickly. So my fear of charter schools would be that the teachers would leave en masse every couple of years, which would lead to only 37% of charter schools actually scoring better than public schools, because that's a national fact right now.
Okay, wonderful. And we'll come back to you can ask the question again later, but you got the fear out. That's very good. Thank you.
Hello there. I hope I'm not going to get off topic, but my thing that I don't see up here as a need is a literacy program. Kids do not have literacy. No one's addressing this problem, and that's the reason why we're having low test scores. And also, as far as like here in Jefferson County, you have magnet schools, and they're considered the top schools in Jefferson County and this and that. But a lot of those students are going to college and have to take remedial classes. So how good really is your advanced placement, you know, in your honors class? So we need to kind of work on that and how we do that and change that. And all this test taking is not good because everyone's not good at test taking. You know, I don't know.
So a fear of that we're being standardized, we're basing our achievement results on standardized tests,
Right.
and not everybody's good at test taking. That'd be a fear. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Okay, good.
that's it.
Thank you very much. We have two more, and we're out of time, but we're going to let both of you all address a need and a fear.
What I'd like to do is turn one of those fears on one side to the fear on the other side.
Okay?
We talk about low-income children being served in the inner city. And the fear is that only saving a few to let the whole building burn is better to let all of the children burn in the same building. The difference in a traditional public school and a traditional charter school, public charter school is, right now, that poor child doesn't have any chance at all. In a public charter school, if we don't put charter schools in here, the low income and particularly black children in the West End do not have the choice, because in a public charter school, they have equal chance of getting in there, in that school, because it is not based upon any other criteria other than a parent choosing to apply. And if there is more applicants, then the rich child has no more of an opportunity than the poor child, because it requires a lottery. I'm fearful that without public charter schools, none of our black children, low-income black children, are going to get into these magnet schools because they don't have the money, the influence, the politics, and the union people behind them in order to make them do that. So black children are losing on the traditional
With our current magnet.
with the whole current system. Okay? That's where we're going.
Okay. Donna, you got something? Yes. Good. Okay, last one.
Yeah, to kind of piggyback there, my biggest fear would be 40 years from now, we're having the same conversation and nothing happens.
So am I correct that would mean, stay here just a second. That would mean that the fear is that charter school is not the solution. It's not going to fix anything.
Well, I hope we would try something different, but my fear is we're going to keep talking about it. Things won't get done in Frankfurt. The gentleman that just spoke will be dead on, and 2 more generations of no progress.
Okay.
Inaction.
There we go. Okay. Thank you all. That was incredible, actually. Now we are, if you all don't have anything to talk about now, then Come on, guys. This is incredible. You all have a ton of sources of great, meaty conversation. So I invite you both to stand. And it is now free for all. I will have a seat.
Alan?
Yes, Deanna.
May I provide both of our panelists a
Yes.
coaching tip? I got a little confused sometimes between what's opinion and what's fact, which is ground rule number 5. And it would really, I think, help our audience, would help me, I know, if you, and sometimes I did hear my opinion or my thinking, and I think if we are seeking truth, that's a very important ground rule in this particular situation.
You did fantastic in your audience comment about that very things. Thank you very much. It's wonderful. Okay, so the way I like to begin this, I'm going to take a seat, but the way I like to begin this is either one of you can start. Doesn't matter. Either ask each other a question, but what I really want you to do is look at the needs on the other side. Look at the fears on the other side and talk about how, wait a minute, that's pretty real. I'm not sure what to do about it. Or maybe you do know what to do about it, but address those and show that you care about the needs of the other side as much as your own. And now you're just up for 45 minutes. Rudy will be our timekeeper, and you're good to go.
I would like to begin by really echoing the concern, and I don't know if race or skin color is the issue. I think it's a lot of times it's a poverty issue. I'm sorry. I said I don't know that it's as much a racial issue as it is a poverty issue when it comes to children in some of the city school districts not getting served, because I've seen the same thing. Is it not working? All right. That better? Okay. I guess I'll start over again. What I guess I'm getting at is the gentleman that spoke about his sincere concerns about the needs of black children in, I don't know, I think he said the West Side, Jefferson. I understand that. I'm not sure that it is as simple as talking about skin color or race in this case, because I've seen personal experience some of the same types of poverty issues coming out of rural Appalachian Ohio as he spoke of. The real issue, the way to address this from my perspective is we cannot in the public schools be fearful of change. I've heard that a couple of times from people that spoke that we've got to be willing to change. Okay? On the other side is the policymakers need desperately to engage the people that are on the ground floor, that are in the trenches, that understand from a first-person basis what some of the issues that are created out of lack of resources, whether those be personal resources that the children don't have coming into the school or a lack of resources that the schools themselves don't have. Because in my opinion, it appears to be that the charter school movement is, again, an attempt to fix something that most of us agree is broken. And that goes back to where I started. There are boys and girls all across this country, all across this state, that are not achieving at a high enough level, whether that be literacy, mathematics, it's across the board. And as a result, they're not getting the skill sets to be successful in the 21st century. I don't know, and I have not seen data to tell me that the charter school solution is going to fix that. Yeah, it's doing something, but let's get the people together that understand what's happening. That's their background. And really analyze what the issues are. Then possibly we can come up and avoid this fear down at the bottom of inaction, because we can't have inaction. I absolutely agree with that. I'm not sure that the solution that has been laid out is the only solution or the best solution.
So I'll address a couple of those, and I'll start in in reverse order. So the last one, in terms of thinking about charter schools as a solution. If I get a group of educators and concerned citizens together, and we make the decision that we want to apply for a charter school, and we're granted that charter, we have the charter, it does not then become my mission as this charter school operator, though, to transform public education in Jefferson County. That's not my job as the charter school operator. And so the idea that charter schools would fix Jefferson County public schools is not a good argument. And I don't think most choice advocates or charter school advocates would make that point. Instead, as a charter school operator, if I'm granted that charter, my charge is to make sure that those 100, 200, 300 kids that I serve in my school, that I serve those kids well. That's my charge. And I'll address a couple of the other things that we talked about as well. In terms of race, I believe, and I'll start with I believe, and research supports this, that we have to consider both socioeconomic status and race. Income, socioeconomic status is incapable of explaining all of the variance that we see in student learning. Even when we control for socioeconomic status, when we're comparing poor kids, poor white kids, and poor black kids, middle class white kids, we still see statistically significant differences in outcomes and in learning. And so race does continue to matter in the words of Cornel West, and race matters to parents, race matters to kids, race matters to teachers. I think sometimes we do ourselves a tremendous disservice when we get into what I call colorblind conversations, where we talk, well, I don't see race. You know, I've had students say that to me, well, I don't see race. You didn't know I was black? Really? But I think that's a little crazy. I think what we have to do is get out of the place where we associate racial differences with deficit thinking. There's nothing wrong with recognizing racial and cultural difference and all of the wonderful things that come with difference. But for so long, for such a big part of our nation's history, and even our community here in Kentucky and in Jefferson County, racial division, racism, discrimination has played a role, and it does continue to play a role, and we must address that and consider that as well when we think about school reforms. And I hope we return a little bit to that conversation. The last fear that I'll address just to start off is this huge one, which I expect that we'll talk about throughout this 45 minutes, and this resource, the allocation of resources, in particular financial resources, because the numbers that Craig cited in terms of the dollars that his district had the year before, that they no longer had in this year, because those children were not in his school, that's real. That's $150,000 in his budget that's not there. And there's nothing that I can tell you, or nothing I can pull out of the air to say, well, I can't. It's real. He's accurate. Now this may be a philosophical difference, right? And this is, I believe, one of the differences that usually comes out between what I call traditionalists and choice advocates. And that is, and I'll say it is as my position, that parents have the right to choose, or ought to have the right to make choices about where their children attend school and how their children are educated. And so, even though it's tough, and this is gonna sound real tough, even though it's tough that Craig has that $150,000 hole in his budget, I believe that what we have to prioritize first is giving parents the option of choosing a school that most appropriately meets the needs of his or her child. And if that means I'm taking him or her out because I don't believe the school has the specific programs or addresses my kids' needs in the way that I want them to, then so be it. If it's because it's a failing school, then so be it. Parents choose schools for a myriad of reasons, and I've done some research in this area. In particular, I can remember a primarily African-American school that I worked in North Carolina, and I asked parents in these charters, this was a charter school, and I asked parents, why is it that you chose to send your child to this school? And this was a high-need school, and let me tell you, in the interviews that I did, not one of those parents listed test scores highly. They told me stuff like, I knew they'd love my kids. I knew that it was the right school for my kid when I got there. They talked about stuff that might not always be able to be quantified in terms of test scores. So all that just to say, parents choose schools for a myriad of reasons, and it's my philosophical position that parents ought to have the option to make those choices. And so first, we have to provide the choices with policy. Then we have to make sure our responsibility is to make sure that there are adequate, high-quality choices for parents to choose from. Now, that's one of the failings that we've had in the charter school movement across the country, because in some places, we've done okay with providing parents choices and say, yeah, you can choose. But if you've got one or two decent schools to choose from and the rest of them are no good, then you haven't done parents any good. And so I think both of those are critical. And I'll stop there.
I'm going to raise a flag here just for a second, because you were onto something that I thought you were going to go one place and you went somewhere else. Okay. You brought up his $150,000, and you recognized a very valid need on his side, that you now have a hole, $150,000 hole that you didn't used to have because of his solution. Mm-hmm. And I thought you were going to say, okay, now I understand that and I care about it, and let me see why that should be okay. And where you went instead was, because my need matters more.
No, I said because I have a difference in philosophical position, which I believe you said was okay under the rules.
Sure, it is. Yes, number 7, it's okay. So, but I want you to, yes, good job. Fantastic. You're holding me honest. But I want you to also prove that you do care about that $150,000, and that you're at least attempting to say, and what can our side do about that? I'm not saying it's easy to figure out what to help him do about it, but if you, on the charter school side, show that you care about his $150,000, now that brings you all together a little more.
So here's why I'll give you a little more meat in terms of why I said my philosophical position makes it difficult to go there. Because if you follow my position, it would be that all public schools, whether charter or traditional, should compete for children. So you follow that line of thought, then it would be that Craig's district ought to be competing for those kids that they lost, whether that's in retaining the kids that chose to go somewhere else or in getting those kids from some other place.
Okay, so he's not totally saying to you, Craig, so just stick it to you. He's saying this is competition and this is healthy.
I heard that competition word here a little bit ago with.
I did.
Meredith. And I guess what I would say, and this may, what I would say, and this may surprise a lot of folks here, I actually agree with the idea of parental rights, okay, of being able to choose. The problem, and what I would encourage the folks, and I hope the legislators in Kentucky would actually consider this, listen to the people on the ground floor, okay? Because the rules that govern charter schools in Ohio and the rules of accountability are mismatched. Okay, what happens, and let me give you a couple of examples. We are held accountable in Ohio for graduation rate, as we well should. Okay, the way the graduation rate is calculated is when a student enters their freshman year, that begins a 4-year cohort. In Ohio, those students are expected to graduate in 4 years. What I have seen in my district is many children, and I can't give you an exact number, just over my tenure, many children will choose in our case, it's typically an online charter school because we're out in the middle of nowhere, at about 6th or 7th grade. And they'll land back at the high school because they want to do athletics at about the 9th or 10th grade level. Usually it's about 10th. They're credit deficient. They've been kicked out of the charter school in some cases. And unless we expend a tremendous amount of resources to get those children caught up, we're held accountable because our graduation rate isn't where it needs to be. What a better solution would be is if those students are progressing along the continuum and they're still enrolled in school and we have credit recovery programs in place, I don't have a problem with them coming back. They're my kids. They're my boys and girls. Okay? But if they're not done in 4 years, but they're still working on it, what's magic about that 4 years? There's a mismatch. Another mismatch.
I agree.
Okay? Another tremendous mismatch has to do with the way the transportation issue is. One of the primary reasons, in my state, that the children do not end up going to brick and mortar charter schools from my area, it's too far. And we talk about choice. Kids in my district they have two choices. They can stay where they're at, well, actually 3 choices, because Ohio has statewide open enrollment. They can go to any public school district in the state by applying for open enrollment. As long as there's room, you got to take them. In our particular district, more parents chose to send their kids to our district than chose to send their kids elsewhere. Okay? That was valuable to us because that one of the messages that we perceive from that is they must feel like we're doing a pretty good job. Okay? And when I would talk to parents, we would do surveys, that's the message that we got. You care, you listen to us. When you look at children in a more urban area, the charter schools in Ohio can choose to use some of their funding to transport kids. They don't have to. It's the responsibility of the district of residence. Okay? And again, where I'm going with this is there's a series of mismatches, part of that beware the problem of the solution, between the laws that allow for charter schools and interdistrict open enrollment and the accountability and other rules, laws that don't align and, in my feeling, are detrimental not only to the children, which is our first priority, but they're also detrimental to the citizens in the resident district, because when resources are drained, there's always a potential. The value perceived of being in a particular area also goes down.
Thoughts on the mismatch of the laws?
Yeah, it's the first point that Craig brought up with the, in particular, the graduation rate piece. I agree. I agree completely.
And that's where if Dr. Lewis and I, go back to my analogy with the with us going in and giving advice to the local emergency room, okay, if he and I and other people with our background had the ability to sit down and have conversations and put together well thought out plans, innovation is very possible. Inaction doesn't have to be. The problem is that it's usually not Dr. Lewis and I and other people that are in the profession that are making those decisions. It's people coming in, just like me or Dr. Lewis going into an emergency room and making recommendations. They're making recommendations on how we should operate. They don't have the background in what the research says is most effective instructionally. They don't have necessarily the background on what is necessary from a resource side to adequately meet the needs of children. Okay? By myself, I don't have all those answers either, and Dr. Lewis, I'm sure, doesn't have all those answers. But collectively, you get a group of good people sitting down around the table who will really listen, and you can get some awfully good solutions. Right now, that's not how it's happening.
Okay, let me jump in, though, in line with number 2, assuming positive intent from all on the other side. Let's even make a big leap and assume positive intent from legislators, if that's possible. I mean, are we saying that legislators are not trying to get those people in a room and...
I think the legislators are looking at the needs of the boys and the girls. But the mismatch...
Microphone.
The mismatch is that they do not appear to be looking to the expertise of the people in the field to help them make the most intelligent decision.
So I can say a little bit about that, because I think there's enough blame, so I'll probably get a flag here, but I think there's enough blame on all sides around. I think there may be, in fact, the case that some legislators don't seek the input of professional educators, but I believe it is also the case that the issue has become so politically polarized, and that sides are so unwilling to talk to each other. I mean, for example, it is very rarely the case, and teachers' unions in a lot of places spend a lot of money and do a lot of legwork in stopping choice policy from happening. But it is rarely the case, and I'm a former teachers' union member in different states, rarely the case that they hold open forums within just their members to vet the issue and talk about the pros and cons, as opposed to telling teachers this is what they're trying to do. That further polarizes the issue, and you end up in a situation where you might have some legislators that are unwilling to look for the input of teachers, but you also end up with some teachers that assume ill intent on the part of the legislators because of what they've been told, and they're then unwilling to participate in policy conversations too.
Okay, and I'm going to walk a funny line myself. Just this event seems to play out what he said, meaning we thought we had people here to talk about it, and we don't. Can you talk about, from your perspective, if what he says has been true in Ohio? Has the teachers union, have the school board members been willing to have the conversation? And I am deeply applying my ground rules and assuming positive intent in the question, okay?
Let me address from what I can really speak factually to,
Good.
which is my district.
Wonderful.
Okay, I can't speak to other districts. I don't have direct understanding. What I will say is this: I spent from 1997 till last summer in the same district. I worked, I was in a position as either an administrator, treasurer, or superintendent throughout that entire time period. I worked extremely hard to build honest and true relationships with teachers, parents, other administrators across the board. Matter of fact, we brought in TAC Force Solutions and went through a training process with the 9 ground rules, which here there's 7, but 9 for our setting. And in doing so, it put me in a position where I truly believe I had trust by my teachers. They believed what I was going to say. They could take it to the bank. I was able to negotiate, we have collective bargaining in Ohio. I was able to negotiate several contracts over my tenure with them, and I specifically say with them. And in some cases, at a time when there are no resources, absolutely none. And we were able to settle congenially. The president of the Teachers Association, I have the utmost respect for her. Matter of fact, the person I was talking about earlier that was the credit flexibility coordinator, that's the president of the teachers union. She's the one that stepped up and did that because she saw the need for that innovation and that change. I believe the only way that can happen is by cultivating that type of rapport. So
Does that rapport also exist with those in charter schools, or at least on the charter school side? Do you have that rapport and seek out that same sort of conversation there?
I have a good friend who is a superintendent and director at a hybrid charter school in my county. None of my students attend his school because it's too far away. However, we've sat down and had many of these conversations. The difference is in his particular setting, he has worked as hard as I have to develop the rapport with the teachers on his staff. He doesn't have the 2-year turnover. Okay? He has teachers that are staying there because they see value in what they're doing. And the turnover that was spoken of earlier, that's a real problem. It's an issue. Okay? But the only way to solve that is to develop. And I absolutely would agree with Alan that in some cases, people on both sides are extremely closed-minded, which doesn't allow us to move forward, and it'll result in that word down there, inaction. Okay, it polarizes us. We see it in Washington right now.
Can't ask for a better commercial for the ground rules. Thank you, Craig. It's fantastic. There's an issue on the board that I haven't heard addressed. Yes, unsolicited. Thank you. There's an issue on the board I haven't heard addressed, and I think it's for you to address. Historically, parents with the most resources have worked the system, which has decreased diversity and leave the disadvantaged in the public school system. Could you talk to that need or fear? Sorry.
Yeah, and I'll touch the diversity piece separate. In terms of, and I remember the lady who, when she asked the question, I believe it was you. And so I agree with you. That has been the case, I think, when you think about kids across the country in districts that typically get into magnet schools. That has been the case. And it's also the case in some places where we have charter schools. There are places where we have charter schools where folks have, or states or regulators have allowed parents to manipulate the system to try to get preference that they shouldn't have in terms of admission. I think that's a real fear. I think it's a legitimate fear, and I think it's something that, especially given our position here in Kentucky, has not adopted a charter school policy yet. I think we have the opportunity to learn where folks have gone wrong with that and say, what can we do to prevent that from happening? Now, one of the things that I think we can do that will help with that is one of the provisions of Representative Montel's bill. And that is, there's language in that bill that specifically directs charter authorizers to give preference to charter applications for charter schools that want to serve what are termed at-risk or high-need students. That is an effort to begin to deal with that. I think that there's plenty of conversation that we could have around that, though. The other thing that I will note with respect to charter schools, and I'm sure Craig would agree with this, he said this earlier, most of the charter schools that we have across the country are in high-poverty urban areas. And the majority of charter schools, majority of students that are attending charter schools, they are not your middle class, affluent white kids. More often than not, they're your lower middle class to working class, poor minority children who are attending charter schools. And so that's a significant difference that we see played out in terms of the demographic composition of charter school, kids enrolled in charter schools versus magnet schools.
If I could, can I change the topic a little bit? One of the things that was brought up by Dr. Lewis, I mean, actually it was in response to something that I had said concerning, the issues of poverty, race, and so forth. He very well may have more information than I do. That's, public policy is kind of his area. My sphere of influence, my point of reference is Dr. Ruby Payne, who actually did a lot of the work looking at rural Appalachian type school districts. And my understanding of her findings are that many of the characteristics of poverty transcend race and ethnicity. So again, I don't have as much expertise as you do probably in that area, because that's not where I've spent my time. But I believe that may be something, if you're not familiar with her research, may be worth looking at.
No, and that's true. And I agree with her findings. Many of the aspects of poverty do transcend race. So my only point was that we often try to make the conversation or turn the conversation to say, well, in 2013, it's really income, or it's really socioeconomic status. It's not race anymore. But even the statistics show, even the research shows, the hardcore research will show it's still both. And we have to look at both. We can't discount either one. It's not all race and it's not all socioeconomics either.
And again, I don't have enough background knowledge to say much more to that. But again, I think that's really where my position comes from, is just this idea of transcending, ethnicity, race, a lot of the same characteristics, and some of the same educational issues. Now, there are cultural differences, I would agree, and that's again one of the values of somebody that is a great deal of experience working in a more urban environment, that understands the cultural differences.
And it's not all cultural differences on the part of kids. There's research that shows, if you think about expectation theory, and what teachers expect of children. There's research that shows that sometimes that falls along racial lines. And not just for white kids having expectations of black kids, but in some instances, even black teachers in having expectations of black kids will not have the same expectations as they would for white kids. And one of the things we know from expectation theory is that those expectations oftentimes impact the performance of children. Children have a way of knowing what people expect to them, and they rise to those levels of expectation. So that's just one example, but there's quite a few where we could look at just to say that race still matters, and we can't discount it.
And again, I think we've made our points there. One of the issues that I'd like to come back to, if I could, when we start talking about this issue or idea of academic progress. Academic progress actually is very critically linked, and I don't know which gentleman was that spoke about the tenure, the length of time that teachers and the relationships that develop. One of the reasons I stayed in the district I was in for so long is I was invested. I was invested in the lives of the kids, the families, and I think that allowed me to be more effective. When I looked at some of the research out there on teacher effectiveness, one of the things that I came across that kind of echoes the issue of whether we're talking charter schools or public schools, of having teachers that will stay put in that environment, is that if you have the 1 year of a fairly ineffective teacher compared to the 1 year of an effective teacher on academic progress, not achievement, academic progress, the difference is 14 percentile point gain compared to 53. Okay? When you look at a running 3 years in a row of an excellent teacher, 3 years in a row of an ineffective teacher, the research shows a 3-year growth of 29 percentile for the kids with that ineffective teacher for 3 years in a row. For the kids that are with a very effective teacher for 3 years in a row, it's 83 percentile point gain. So again, we're probably saying the same thing, regardless of where we go. Teachers impacting in the classroom transcends the type of school, the demographics. Effective teachers have amazing results. And if you end up having teachers that are very transient, okay, and don't develop that rapport and that relationship, which I think was the point that the gentleman made, then I think that research problematically could be exacerbated.
Thoughts?
Yeah, two things I'll say related, and I don't think they're in direct opposition. And it related to teacher quality is the reality that in high poverty urban schools that it's exceptionally difficult to attract high quality teachers. It's much easier to attract high quality teachers in middle income schools that serve middle income kids, middle class schools. It's a challenge, and in some cases, in some high poverty urban schools, I mean, you start school and you literally don't have teachers, and you rely on substitutes, you rely on long-term substitutes. So I think we have to keep that in that part in context as well when we think about turnover, the turnover rate, and related to some of our high poverty urban traditional public schools and charter schools, is that it is really hard to attract teachers. The other thing that I'll touch on, which we haven't talked a whole lot about, is collective bargaining agreements. Right? So that, I mean, usually in these types of conversations, that's the big elephant in the room. But I like to talk about it head on. I am not an opponent of teachers' unions at all. I think unions do some marvelous things, and I think there are opportunities for unions to do some things that they're not doing yet, but there are lots of possibilities. It is also the case, though, that some of the provisions of collective bargaining agreements, in some places, not all, because you gave some examples of where districts and unions work together to really get good agreements, but in some cases, provisions of agreements really get in the way of school leaders, of principals being able to make instructional leadership decisions for the benefit of the school. One of those examples, and this is a particular example in Jefferson County, is with the selection of teachers. Collective bargaining agreements is in a number of places, and Jefferson being one of them, that really puts some strings or ties the principal's hands in terms of who he or she can put in positions. And as an ed leader, as a superintendent or principal, I mean, I think you know as well or better than anybody how important it is for you to be able to look at a position, to be able to look at the kids that it serves and what you need that teacher to accomplish, and then not have your hands tied behind your back when making decisions about who's going to be the best person to select for that position. The other way that collective bargaining agreements can sometimes be a detriment to progress is in the way of teacher training and professional development. Sometimes there are initiatives that principals want to get off the ground, new and innovative programs and strategies that they want to use, but that require a certain amount of professional development and of training. And if the collective bargaining agreement says that for this month the hours are up, then there's sometimes nothing that the principal can do. Those are two examples, but collective bargaining agreements is a big deal, and so the policy, the law that we're proposing in Kentucky, teachers in charter schools would not be protected by the provisions of the collective bargaining agreements. There's only a few in Kentucky. Most of the state doesn't have collective bargaining agreements, but teachers, for example, in Jefferson County, would not be protected by the JCTA agreement.
I'm glad to hear you say that, you're not opposed to collective bargaining, but I think that the key there is what that negotiating agreement says. Is it for the kids or is it for the adults in the room?
That's right.
And when the only way that's going to happen is when you have true leadership, and I'm talking teacher leaders and administrative leaders who can sit down and look at what's in the best interest of the kids. And I think, there's a huge difference a lot of times between management styles and leadership styles. And my philosophy has always been that there's no such thing as a leader if nobody's following you.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, it doesn't exist. So I have to have the education professionals and the support staff working together collectively on common goals. That sounds to me more like a leadership problem on both sides than it does a collective bargaining issue.
I don't know. I think that may be simplifying it. I think it's a little more complex. We can pull out collective bargaining agreements, and I'm pretty sure we could pull out provisions, specific provisions, and say that actually gets in the way. Mm-hmm. That is a provision that inhibits principals from being able to make instructional leadership decisions that would be good for kids. Now, I agree 100% that it is a leadership issue, leadership in terms of teachers and leadership in terms of administrators. And I don't think any one party is completely at fault or is completely innocent. But I think the reality is, and I think we'd be hard pressed to find too many ed leaders that would say that in some cases there aren't collective bargaining agreements that hurt and that are counterproductive to what we want to do in schools.
Okay. I'm going to speak just to that because I think it relates back to the idea of charter schools in Kentucky not being under collective bargaining agreement. The one experience that I've had as a superintendent, and it was weird how it happened. It was through a grant-funded position. We had one teacher, had all the same credentials as everybody else in the district, but somehow that teacher did not fall under the collective bargaining agreement. I found it so much more difficult to equitably work with that particular teacher and the principal because the boundaries were not clear, the parameters were not set. If the parameters are set with the boys and girls in mind and their best interests in mind, then over time, and I'm not saying overnight, over time, leaders on both sides, I think, by putting their heads together, can come up with better solutions than just folks on the administrative side or just folks on the teacher side. And I don't know that, I doubt if you disagree with that. The question becomes, how do you get to that? And, I can only speak to the collective bargaining agreements that I have dealt with. And it took a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. Most of it not sitting around a negotiating table. Most of it developing trust and rapport over years.
Joe, you had a final question?
Actually, Dr. Lewis went right where I was going to ask. So.
Okay. We only have about 2 more minutes left. Anything else on the board? Y'all want to? Why don't you do like a closing argument, a closing point?
I think this has been phenomenal.
And we're not at the very end. We still have audience participation after.
Okay. But having the opportunity to talk about some of these issues has been phenomenal, and I've really enjoyed it. One of the things that comes out of one of the comments I made about the political polarization in Kentucky, and I think is evidenced by this room and this stage. In a state where charter schools the charter school issue has been so divisive, so politically polarized, so many people against. And I'm really happy that Craig was here, but I think you have to ask the question, why was it so difficult to find somebody that was willing to give the argument against charter schools that lives in Kentucky?
Not true.
And the other
15.
And we had some commitments, and we had folks that backed out. The other
We'll
thing,
talk to you.
The other thing that I'll say is for an issue that's been so divisive and so heavily debated. I mean, we don't have a huge audience here either. I think we have a long way to go in Kentucky in terms of really trying to break barriers and putting children first, and talking about policies that are going to be best for children instead of just reverting to comfortable ideological corners and saying, I'm not going to talk to him because he's a Republican, or I'm not going to talk to him because he's a Democrat, or this idea that because he's a Republican or because he's a Democrat, there's absolutely no way I could ever agree with anything that he would agree. That, we've got to get over that.
Okay, Craig?
Okay. I think I'm going to finish this with where I started it. I mean, it's ultimately, it's about what's best for the boys and the girls that make up the classrooms around the state and around the nation. And there are success stories for, charter school advocates. There are success stories for people that are diametrically opposed to charter schools. Mm-hmm. There are horrible failures on both sides. And if we truly believe that the welfare of the children is what's number one, then it's incumbent upon all of us, again, whether Democrat, Republican, black, white, high poverty, low income, high income, it doesn't matter. We need to be willing to address some of the issues, because what I have seen happen in Ohio, I hope doesn't happen in Kentucky. Because what I've tried to allude to is there's just such a mismatch. And going to the ground rule, assuming positive intent, I truly believe that the governor of the state of Ohio, the legislators in Ohio, they want what is best for children. Okay? But very few of them have the expertise in the area that their policies and laws are making it happen. And because of that, some of the intended solutions actually become unintended consequences.
Wonderful. We talked about race and collective bargaining and all kinds of crazy hard things, and we still like each other. This was fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay, so now it's time for you all for about 20, 30 minutes, however long you all want to stay. And you're first up, absolutely, to say anything you want. We like you all to keep this about maybe 3 or 4 minutes a person, and also keep in mind the ground rules, because as you're talking, I'll also raise a flag if I hear something out of line. Go for it.
Well, I want to thank both of you all. This has been an absolutely fabulous discourse. And if it gets any more awkward, I'll just slowly back away from my because I would kill my students if they misread the prompt, right? But then I did it, so it's kind of ironic. I'll share that tomorrow morning.
We won't talk it.
So, on a couple different fronts. One, I'm curious where Kentucky has passed the District of Innovation waiver. In my mind, and it is very selective and it's very small and token right now, but potentially 5 years down the road, as that momentum builds and spreads, is there the opportunity to do what a charter school aims to do within that structure?
I'll tell you,
Great question.
So districts of innovation, I mean, in large part, and you're right there, you see a lot of the charter school spirit in the districts of innovation bill. The districts of innovation bill, I believe, was largely passed as an answer to charter school advocates and saying, look, well, we have districts of innovation, we don't need charter schools. Here's where districts of innovation does not address one of my big needs. A district needs to apply to the state to be granted status as a district of innovation, and with that status comes waivers, right, from certain state level policies. So you get the autonomy that we talk about with charter schools. Would you assume, though, if we only limit our policy, our choice policy, or our innovation policy to districts of innovation, is that all districts know how to go about fixing the problems that they have, and or that they're willing to fix all of the problems that maybe the public thinks they ought to fix? So for a district that has great leadership and great ideas about how to deal with some of the pressing issues that they have, and what's been standing in the way is state regulations and state policy, absolutely. You apply for district innovation, you get those regulations and policies out of the way, and then you take off running and you make it happen. But for a district that doesn't know how to make it happen.
Well, and those districts would probably be servicing their children in an authentic way within the confines of their traditional school system in ways that Dr. Meredith has done too.
Well, in terms of how this has played out so far with districts of innovation, because I mean, I'm familiar with the work of most of the districts that have been granted innovation status, and I think they're doing phenomenal work. Most of the things that I see, though, coming out of it, to be quite honest with you, I think those districts would have done that with that district of innovation bill and not, because they have that type of leadership. And there's that type of culture in that districts where they were going to find a way to make it work for kids.
Is there a way of taking, because that legislation was passed very, very quickly, and does need refining to a certain degree in order to really increase its impact across the state? Is there a way of somehow incorporating some of the charter or some of your aims within a region?
I don't think so. I don't think so, and I'll tell you why. Would we need, as one of my old professors used to say, figure out what to do when you don't know what to do. And so I believe there are some districts, there are some schools, there are some leaders out there that have these pressing issues, and assuming no ill intent, may really have no clue in terms of how to approach those. So if I don't have an idea of how to approach it, of how to fix the problem, then what exactly am I going to apply for? What charter school policy would get at is giving folks outside of the district the opportunity to come in with some know-how, with some ideas, to apply for a charter and say, hey, we can work with this problem in a way that you haven't thought of.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
All right. Next. Oh, yes, go for it, Craig.
I just wondered on this idea that with respect to innovation, I absolutely agree that it really comes down to the leadership in the particular district. I don't know how the District of Innovation are set up here in Kentucky. However, one of the things that typically happens because of the political system we live in is, 3 years from now, 4 years from now, depending on where the term is, there'll be a new governor, there'll be new legislators, and there'll be new rules. And the rules change. And the playing field, you have to go out and relearn and understand what you're doing. And I've experienced that.
It almost sounds like an argument for charter schools then.
Well, take it as it is. I think what it boils down to is that the people that are making those changes, if they would allow the professionals in those districts that are being successful to move forward and to continue to move, then the innovation he speaks of probably wouldn't erupt or develop without any specific legislation, but what ends up happening, at least from my experience, is that as the legislature changes, as the governor changes, the rules change, the priorities change, and then what was working in a particular district is no longer funded, is no longer viable, and you're back to drawing board.
But just a point of clarification too, though, Greg. I will say this may be a difference in our opinions and our positions. A gentleman earlier said that he assumes that all teachers would care for. I don't remember his exact words, so I don't want to mischaracterize him. But I will say that I do not assume that all district leaders or school leaders and teachers are capable. I do not make that assumption. I believe we have some district level, school level leaders and teachers that are not capable. And so that's really one of the failings, I believe. Maybe it's not even accurate to call it a failing. One of the areas the Districts of Innovation doesn't address is if that district, if a school doesn't have capable leadership, then that bill does nothing for that district or that school.
Okay? And then the question becomes, why is that leadership absent? Why is there a vacancy? Okay?
I guess one of my fears is that our students are going to be used in a capitalistic situation. And don't get me wrong, I'm all for capitalism because I think it creates competition, and I think competition creates better things. But I really am a little fearful that our students are going to be part of an experiment, or where's the accountability for the charters? I guess that's my question. Where's the accountability? And you get a student 2 or 3 or 4 years in a failing charter school, he's going to be just as bad off as he is in a failing public school. So, what's the criteria here for creating a charter? Does that mean that anybody can generate some capital, can come out, hire some people, and create a charter school? Or are they going to be educators who are going to be concerned about the kids? Because when you get right down to it, both of you said, what we're concerned about is our students getting the education that they need for today's world. And if we don't do that, then I think we're selling some things short. So that's my question. Where's the accountability?
I can speak to what we want to do in Kentucky, and certainly this is what I hope happens is this generates conversation, and we talk about how we generate policy that covers these things. But so far, this is what we have on the table. I talked a little bit earlier about the importance of the charter school authorizer, because the charter school authorizer is going to be the body that receives the charter application. Now they won't be able just be able to say, free will and say, well, I think this is good, I don't think this is good. They will have specific criteria in terms of things that they're looking for. But that charter authorizer is going to be that first critical level of determining whether or not this body, this group should be granted a charter. And then that authorizer has the secondary responsibility of holding that charter school accountable for the terms of the charter. So a part of that application, a part of that charter are performance standards. They're performance expectations of children. And if a charter school over a certain number of years, I think we're talking about three years, fails to meet those standards, we're proposing an automatic closure provision where the charter school would not be able to remain open. Now, to address one of your other concerns, because I agree with you completely. You said a kid doesn't have 3 years. If a kid's in a failing school for 3 years, then the kid's up the creek. And I agree with you completely. Those weren't your words. That's my words, up the creek. But the reality is if a kid's in a traditional public school and doing well, and his or her parents are happy with what's going on, not just it's a good school, not just it's a high-performing district, but if the kids, those specific kids are doing well in that school, 9 times out of 10, those parents are not inclined to take the kid out and send them somewhere else. It's usually parents who take their kids out of traditional public schools and send them to charter schools are parents that are typically not satisfied with what they're receiving in the traditional public school already.
in Ohio, the accountability that relates to student achievement, student progress, graduation rate, charter schools, community schools, both names are interchangeable, are both held to the same standard. The difference is, and this is why I keep going back to this idea of a mismatch between laws that come out of one part of the legislature and another part, is that there are penalties that come back on public schools when children in the failing charter school leave and come back to the public school district. They're always, the way the legislation is written, they're always the responsibility of the district of residence. And as a result, there's a mismatch somewhere. And if some of that were removed and the other accountability provisions were in place, then some of my concerns would be removed. Okay? But that's not the case, and that's why I hope that the path that you take in Kentucky looks seriously at some of those issues.
Good comment. Okay, next.
First of all, I'd like to echo my buddy Brad and just thank you guys for this very enlightening debate tonight. It's been fantastic. I'm pretty new to this debate still, so I don't understand all the dynamics. So if you guys could help me understand exactly why this has become so politicized. I mean, I understand that teachers, unions, and unions in general tend to be creatures of the Democrats, and I don't understand. A couple of the dynamics that I don't understand is the rural-urban dynamic. I think from what I've learned recently, as a Democrat, if you're in a highly urban area, you can be for charter schools. You know,
What's allowed, what's not allowed.
Yes, and so I don't understand why Republicans seem to love these. I truly don't get some of these dynamics and why it's such a hot button issue politically either.
In Kentucky, we can't go so far in Kentucky as to say that all Republicans support charter schools. There's still some diversity in the Republican Party in terms of how Republicans feel about charter schools. Now, we do have our strongest base of support in the Republican Party, and there's a large number of Republicans that do support charter schools. In terms of Democrats, to date, I don't believe we have a Democrat in the state Senate or the state House that's come out publicly in support of charter school. Not one.
You know why?
Why?
Yeah, that's the question.
Well, you're going to throw a flag at me.
Well, I'm assuming a good motive.
But I'd be happy to tell you about that.
Do we allow or do we not allow? I think we want you to assume positive intent and say whatever. Go ahead.
Okay. So, I mean, one of the big issues, just being perfectly honest, is KEA and JCTA, Kentucky Educators Association and Jefferson County Teachers Association, are adamantly opposed to the passage of a charter school bill. And they are big supporters of Democrats.
Can you get at why they're so opposed? I mean, what's the threat?
Well, one of the big threats is the collective bargaining agreement that we talked about. I mean, that's a big deal, and so, you know, I'm not pulling any punches here. In the proposed legislation for us, teachers that teach in charter schools will not be protected by collective bargaining.
Do you realize you just answered the question while still assuming positive on the other side? You were factual about it. You just said this is this.
I'm learning.
Proud of you, man. This is good. It's wonderful. I know you're answering the question from your perspective, but I saw no negative intent.
Do you have anything?
I think that what Dr. said concerning I think it's more of just a general apprehension of human nature, of change, fear of the unknown,
and not just the unknown. You've got valid fears that is the solution going to just create more problems. That's a valid thing.
That is, but I guess because at least in Kentucky, because this is still in discussion, it hasn't been implemented yet. I think that there is a lot of what's this going to look like, what's this going to do to my career, what's going to affect. And part of that comes from it's the implementation of charter schools in other locales, i.e. Ohio, where some negative things have resulted and people talk to each other. And they're concerned that some of those same things will resurface in a new venue.
In my limited research, is it not also true there are positive statistics of charter schools in other locations?
There are.
So what I think I've heard you say is we're toward the end of the line from states implementing it. Let's look at all those other experiments and pick the best of all worlds.
And one of the things about the collective bargaining also, in Ohio, there are some, depends on who sponsors the charter school. There are some charter schools that are, the faculty is under the collective bargaining agreement, which is different than what you're describing proposed in Kentucky.
But one clarification too, though, for Kentucky is to understand the vast majority of school districts in Kentucky do not have collective bargaining.
That's opposite of Ohio.
Okay, thank you, great question.
There is something else I want to bring up, but I do want to add to the collective bargaining of why Democrats are afraid, and it may be a perception only, but I certainly have that perception because of the lack of collective bargaining. Right across the river, we have a charter school where the teachers are paid about half of what teachers are paid in public schools, and they don't last very long in the school. So we see those things happening in concrete situations, and that makes people who are in favor of people being paid decent wages concerned about charter schools. And it really concerns me to find out that the legislation proposed in Kentucky actually includes the fact that they're not allowed collective bargaining. That's, to me, undemocratic. But anyway, what I wanted to talk about, and I think is really, really important, is before you come to solutions, you have to figure out what's the cause of the problem. And so I really think that's something that needs to be looked at. Is the cause of children not achieving as much as they should the fact that some parents didn't get a choice? I don't know that there's any evidence for that. And so the really important thing is look at the causes of why children are not succeeding, and there's a ton of research where you look at. And then the other thing is, of course, look at the research on charter schools, and if they in fact do address the causes or not, and if they are selective or not, and that whole thing. But mostly analyze your causes before you accept a solution.
Share a few causes with us from your research.
They have come up tonight, many people have mentioned them. There's a whole conglomerate of social interactions that are created by a capitalistic system where people are judged by how much money they have. And so children who are living in poverty, brought up in poverty, with parents who had the same situation and have been part of a culture that disparages them for not being rich. Children grew up disparaging themselves and their community. I have been in a situation of teaching children, and in this case it was the Lincoln Foundation. They were all either black or low income, but there were white and low income kids in there. The black kids weren't low income, but anyway. And the kids would come in and they talked about which schools they went to. They had the tracking of those schools down, they knew which schools were what and so forth. And that happens throughout our whole society. Schools are a reflection of our society. And so if we can, and overcoming that is very difficult, especially when we isolate children, as we do in so many school systems, by income, and the racial, income and race go together, as you know, and that conglomerate. So that's where the big problems are. The problems are in their parents not having jobs, so they feel proud of themselves. There are all kinds of problems. Very few of them, I think, have to do with choosing. It's not going to be the children who need the help most whose parents are going to choose to go anywhere because they don't even have time to think about it. And that did get off of my trying to be so neutral on a little bit.
So you don't need to be neutral. We want you to share your opinion strongly.
In terms of the causes to the problems of student learning, I mean, nobody would disagree with you. You're absolutely right. These are complex problems, and there are complex causes to them. And I'm nowhere near naive enough to believe that even we could fix, quote unquote, fix all that ails our schools, that then achievement would be perfect. That's not realistic. Joyce Epstein's work out of Johns Hopkins University talks about the spheres of influence in children's lives: the home, the school, and the family. The home, the community, and the school. And you're right, we have to attend to all three. But in terms of our conversation about education policy and this matter, I mean, we've got to fix the schools. We've got to fix the other two too, but that doesn't mean we don't fix the schools. In terms of choice, I don't believe choice would fix anything. Choice more than a way of fixing schools. Choice is more a principle that I believe should be adopted, and a lot of folks believe should be adopted, that parents should have choice over where and how their kids are educated. But there are other things that charter school policy brings to this conversation in addition to just choice. In particular, the part about accountability and having flexibility for leaders having flexibility to lead and teachers having flexibility to innovate.
Okay. Next.
Getting to the issue of poverty in relationship to education. You know, I don't say that poverty isn't an issue. The problem is not that because children are poor, they can't learn. It is the expectations that we put within those children. In the Charles A. Tinley School, accelerated school in Indianapolis, the kids that they received in the middle school were 3 to 4 years behind in their reading capacity. They came from a demographic as we live, as our church is, in the west end of Louisville. The highest crime area, highest drug-infested area. And the children in 2003 were graduating from that neighborhood at 23%. By 2005, those children coming from that same diverse kind of neighborhood was graduating at 99%. And it's because the charter school had the ability to go in and change the dynamics and the expectations. According to the latest Credo report, the black children and urban children in Indiana are exceeding the black children that are going through, that are enrolled in the traditional public schools by significant numbers is their quote. And so I think what we need is another opportunity for parents to choose a school that will demonstrate the high expectations and require that of the children. And that's why public charter schools are necessary as an option for parents. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Okay, we've only got 5 more minutes and 2 more people that want to talk, so come on up.
Hi, first of all, I want to thank Dr. Lewis and Dr. Meredith for bringing this wonderful discussion today. And I hope that we can go away with a positive affirmation, that we can come together and quit doing the same thing we've been doing over and over and expect different results. In my psychology class, they said if you do the same thing the same way over and over, that's called insanity. So I hope we don't go away with the insanity mode, that we cannot come together, reason together, and come up with a solution that is good for all of our kids.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. One thing I think Mr. Meredith said that kind of struck a chord with me about government in general, when you are talking about the budget in the past, when you had 6 or 7 kids go somewhere else and you said that you lost $150,000. And this is not, I appreciate you coming down and try to treat you with some Southern hospitality. That was not your money to begin with. And I hear this in government all the time, that the city lost this, and the city needs revenue. We have to increase our revenue. It's our revenue. That money belongs to the, we've decided as a society that the government is going to allocate funds for children to get education. Those funds, therefore, have to follow that child. It's that parent's budget. It's that parent's decision to say, I'm going to go from school A to school B. And it's not the school, hey, we just lost $150,000. The school should be saying, we just lost 6 kids for a reason. A parent made a conscious decision to say, we're not going here anymore, we're going somewhere else. So that would be my kind of philosophical, thing that always kind of unnerves me when I hear government say things like that. But also to you, Mr. Meredith, obviously you're a good teacher, your heart's in the right place. You're not our problem. Our problem is in the people that set these rules, that set the constraints to Jefferson County Schools can do this, they can do this, they can't do that. And like you said earlier, that's usually done by a politician and not by someone that's got your kind of expertise. And maybe that's why you're filling in tonight for someone who didn't want to fill those questions. So and I'm rambling here, I apologize. If it is about the kids, then it's got to be about the kids and not about the budgets. Thank you. Have a safe trip home.
I appreciate that, and I tend to agree with what you just said. With the one exception, and I keep going back to the idea in Ohio that there are layers of rules that have unintended, I'm assuming positive, unintended consequences. And as a superintendent, managing this budget, the board has made this allocation of taxpayer money. I absolutely 100% agree. We're required to be good stewards. If those 6 students, and I think it was 25 students, but whatever it was, I can't remember. I didn't remember that. When they went to a charter school, community school, generally in our situation, an online learning environment, if the rules were such that when those children return to our district, the local district is not penalized and have to invest additional resources above that $150,000 to try to bring those kids back up. That's what I've seen. If there was a no fault type of thing where those kids, the parents chose to have them come back, because honestly, in a rural area, most of the time they come back. And when they do, if they're on track, great. I don't need the credit for it. We didn't build it. Okay? But I also don't feel like the local district should be penalized and when we have to invest additional resources, because we inevitably do. Where are those going to come from?
Sure.
The one thing I'll say though, and I, as I said before, and I continue to agree, I think that's a real problem.
To play devil's advocate though, if I'm a charter school in Cleveland, and children come to me from a persistently low achieving traditional public school, and they enroll in my charter school, don't I have the same issue in terms of needing additional funds to invest to get those kids to where they need to be?
You do, but here's the mismatch. I was trying to address earlier, and this is a perfect way to kind of bring things together. The way the rules have been set up, at least in my state, they're the same, regardless of whether it's a urban district, a suburban district, a rural district, and the needs are substantially different. The reasons parents are choosing to go open enrollment to another public district, or the reason they're choosing to go to a charter school, are drastically different in a large urban district compared to a wealthy suburban district or a high-achieving rural district. Still, but that option is still there. There just needs to be a recognition, I believe, in the rules that addresses that. I mean, it becomes a societal responsibility, going back to this topic, for the boys and girls. Okay? Those kids ultimately are our responsibility. And whether it's happening in the charter school or public school, if they're being successful, great. But if they're not, right, we need to innovate.
All right. We're done. So you can see we are huge, big spenders here at Tactical Solutions. This is our gift to our panelists. So tackle the issues, not each other. So much for coming. Appreciate it, just very, very much. So the challenge to you is, I hope you learned a new way to think, specifically that the other side on any issue is not necessarily evil. And when you tend to have that thought, pause, take a step back, breathe a little bit, assume positive intent, clarify your own opinions, clarify that this is an opinion, not a fact that you have, and have better political discourse. This is what we do at Tac Force Solutions in business. We help executive leadership teams hear their employees better. We help departments talk across departments better by using a similar set of ground rules that are on the table. So we ask you to live this way in all of your life, all of the conversations you have. Thank you very much for coming. We do hope to have another follow-up session in Frankfurt and in Lexington on this same topic. And we will probably also continue the conversation on different topics here in Louisville. So thank you all very much for coming.